glad you could spend a little bit of time with us today as we provide you with a bit of an overview on what this course we have called Economic Development for Elected Officials looks like. It is a full day course, so obviously we'll just be hitting the highlights today to give you a bit of a flavor of what's covered, give you a bit of an overview of what your elected officials might gain from taking this particular course. And we'll leave lots of time at the end to answer any questions that you might have. And certainly happy to have a bit of a dialogue and a discussion today on anything that's on your brain when it comes to this topic. Because as EDA, we're always looking for ways to improve our content, always looking for ways we can better support our membership and communities across the province. So Economic Development for Elected Officials is part of our EDA Institute program. You can see it's one of the core courses, but it can be for elected officials just the beginning of their journey towards certification. So both economic development practitioners as well as elected officials have the opportunity to earn certification through EDA Institute. And you can see from the list that there's an awful lot of things to consider when it comes to this profession. And so we make those available to our practitioners as well as elected officials across the province. Most of the courses are available either in an in-person format, in an online format, or some kind of hybrid arrangement. And so at the end of today's presentation, you'll get a link with more information on how to book courses, how courses are priced. We'll give you Janice's cell phone number. No, I'm kidding. But she's the one that takes care of all of those things. She takes care of all of the details. But again, if you're looking to build capacity in your community, in your municipality, or perhaps just in your own career, certainly encourage you to think about how these courses might benefit you and your team, and how we as EDA can be of support and more assistance to you. I've enjoyed being a part of the Institute, had the opportunity to teach a number of these courses, and I think there's always something that I come away with after every one of those discussions in different communities and hearing the different issues. So that's the whole curriculum, but specifically today, we're just going to provide you with a bit of a preview and a discussion on the elected officials course. So what does that look like? Well, you can see here, we do provide a bit of a economic development fundamentals or an economic development 101 for elected officials, really more of a 30,000 foot level view of what economic development is. Because candidly, a lot of elected officials come in, and I can say that respectfully because I was one. I'm now a recovering politician, served 12 years on the council for the village of Sterling and the last 2 terms as mayor before this last election. I'm now, like I said, a recovering politician, retired. That's okay. But a lot of elected officials are coming in with limited or no experience in economic development, may not have any industry or business experience themselves. Maybe they've come from a social service background or an education background. So we want to make sure we provide that high level view of what economic development actually is and is not when we deliver this course. We spend a little bit of time in the program talking about the role of government. I'll walk you through that in a little bit here as well. Again, I have a particular view, but typically in a Western country, free market society, we have differing views of to what extent government should be involved in economic development. So it's important to flush that out in conversation, particularly as a council. You want to understand the spectrum of views of where government intervention either makes sense or is not supported in your community. We talk about, economic development planning processes. So again, I'll walk you through that in a few moments. But there are a number of tools that are available to councils or practitioners to use with their councils. There's some best practices around strategic planning. Again, keeping people focused on what that looks like. We talk about goal setting. I think that's often a challenge for councils is they do the strategic planning exercise, usually in the first few months after being elected. And then it's like, okay, well, what are the actual goals we're working towards? Inside of that strategy, what are the measures that we're going to hold people accountable? So we can have those conversations. It's never interesting, of course, to governments, but how do you fund economic development is usually a topic that comes up. So we can talk about grants. We talk about the different models of economic development organizations that are out there. And so that can be quite an interesting conversation. We talk about measurements. As you saw perhaps on the previous slide, EDA Institute now offers a full day course on performance measurement in economic development, but we do sort of hit the highlights in an introductory way in the elected officials course. And then we usually end the day with a discussion about economic resilience. And, typically when we're talking about resilience, it's the what happens after emergency management. I think in Alberta, we do a pretty good job, unfortunately, out of necessity around emergency management. So, for the fires in Jasper, Fort McMurray, floods in Calgary. We do a very good job of managing that. It's statutory. We have structures in place. There's lots of rigorous training, but we never really talk about what happens after. How does a community recover? We also don't talk about the steps you can take now to better prepare your communities to be more resilient when it comes to, perhaps, I don't know, a tariff dispute or some other thing that happens. And so we touch on that again in the course to get your elected officials thinking a bit about what they should be doing, what's their role in preparing a community for economic resilience. And it's a bit different than economic development. And so again, we make those distinctions to help people better understand the concepts. One of the things that I think it's important to talk about with elected officials or anybody is what exactly is economic development. And at Economic Developers Alberta, we've adopted a very similar definition to what EDAC uses, EDAC being the Economic Developers Association of Canada. For those that perhaps are not members, is the national certifying body for our profession. And so their definition is really what's on the screen there, that economic development is a process. It's not a project. It's not a one-off. It takes time. There are repeatable steps. So I think it's important that elected officials are taught and help, have a better understanding of the fact that economic development takes years. The example I always use is that the average file that comes to me for a new investment might take 18 to 24 months to land, and that's probably quick. So it's entirely possible that as a process, the work you're funding today, the work you're asking me to do today, you may not see tangible results till after the next election, right? Economic development tends to last longer than the political cycle. So that's something we want people to be mindful of. Part of it is also determining what's suitable for your community. What do you want the economy to look like? What are the social and political environments? What makes sense for your community? I'm Director of Growth and Engagement for Lethbridge County in my current role. Agriculture is a foundation for this region. We're the most agriculturally productive county in the province. Agriculture contributes about $4 billion to GDP. So chances are, what's suitable for economic development in Lethbridge County is going to be anything that complements or works with agriculture. Anything that could potentially damage, harm, or take away from our agricultural base likely wouldn't be suitable for our community. It might be perfectly fine for the municipality next door, but part of our process for economic development at EDA is helping elected officials understand that they need to define what it is they want for their community. We talk about balanced growth as being part of a key consideration, right? We've all seen the spikes and the demands on infrastructure for massive unplanned population growth or a major economic boom or an economic bust. None of us want that. We want nice, steady growth. What does that look like? What are the processes we can put in place? What are the policies elected officials can put in place to make that happen? And then we also talk about wealth as opposed to just creating jobs or just creating industries for the sake of creating industries. And what I mean by that is, the focus tends to be sometimes in economic development on landing the perfect brand, getting that new retail store. And in a small community that doesn't have a grocery store, or in a community where you're trying to attract people and you want those big banner marquee brand names, maybe that makes sense. If you ask my lovely wife, bless her, she's an engineer, she runs her own company. She's always said to me, Trevor, your number one priority is to bring Lululemon to Southern Alberta. We want a permanent Lululemon store in Lethbridge. And that's interesting. That's her priority, but that's not a wealth generating industry. Retail tends to be wealth recycling. So again, what's actually going to lift up the community? What's going to add value in supply chains? What's going to have those cascade effects? In Trevor's opinion, that's, wealth generating is where you want to be the focus of your economic development work, because the rest will then cascade from there. So again, helping elected officials understand how we as practitioners define economic development, and then identifying how a council's strategic plan or their priorities might fit into that definition, I think is an important discussion to have. And conveniently, the course starts off with that. There's a number of studies out there that confirm these ratios. I'm happy to send those to you if you're bored, lonely, and having difficulty sleeping one night, if you want to go through them. It's been repeated multiple times, but these numbers stay fairly consistent over time. And what the research tells us is that for every 100 new jobs in the economy, 55 come from existing businesses, right? So 55 out of 100 new jobs in the economy are typically created by helping your existing businesses to grow and scale. 44 new jobs 44 out of 100 new jobs in the economy typically come from small startups and new enterprise springing up inside your community. And only one out of 100 actually come from those big corporate greenfield relocations. So the question I always ask to elected officials, if job creation, and everyone campaigns on it, if job creation is your number one priority, this ratio should help inform how you're allocating budget resources towards economic development. So if you're only focused on investment attraction, if you're only funding work on that 1 out of 100, then you ought reasonably to expect not as much job creation as if you were investing in the other two categories. So those are the trade-offs that you need to make. Now, this is just jobs. It is not the same ratio, clearly, if you're looking to grow property taxes, which, again, as a municipality, is a pretty significant source of income. That becomes a major decision point. So these are the kinds of things we want elected officials to understand. What exactly are the outcomes you're looking for? And again, you help prioritize those for your community. Fantastic. What are the corresponding investments and policy environments you need to create to support the outcome you actually want? And to be clear, is it jobs? Is it taxes? Is it both? Is it something else? We have to be very clear on what we're trying to accomplish, because only from there can we define the strategies and actions that are required to deliver it. So that becomes, I think, an important part of the conversation. We talk a little bit about the benefits of community economic development. Again, I think people hear the phrase economic development, they think of the ribbon cutting, where the mayor's there cutting the red ribbon, because that's fun, it's sexy, it gets attention in the media. But why do we do economic development? Well, it's this whole list of things. And again, depending on the priorities for your community, depending on what your needs are, you may design and customize your strategies to achieve these different outcomes. Maybe it's a relatively diversified economy. Maybe you already have that, but it's really about strengthening local business. Maybe there's a distressed downtown area, so revitalization becomes really important. Maybe, attracting workforce, retaining talent, retaining youth has been a real challenge in your community. So then quality of life factors become more important, right? Whereas we're seeing increasingly Gen Z workers, and to a lesser extent, Gen Y, have prioritized quality of life, parks, green spaces, recreation time over incomes. People are willing now to trade off, give up higher salaries in order to have the, quote, lifestyle that they want. Well, again, that may be the single most important consideration for your community above anything else on this list. So community-driven economic development plays a role in helping you achieve these goals, understanding what's important, again, allocating resources, having the trade-off discussion with elected officials who set the pace and set the priorities is part of what this course is all about. Now, we also look at, more of a community-driven versus a traditional economic development. So, want to be transparent with you. This is not a traditional economic development course. EDA doesn't believe in traditional economic development. We are very much believers of that community-driven model, which means it's focused on livelihoods. It could include things like childcare. That's part of how you have a livelihood. It's not just about getting you a job. It's the other things that you require. We want to be inclusive. We're looking at traditionally underrepresented groups in a community. Do we have programs that lift every kind of entrepreneur up? Is it community-based? Does it reflect the feelings of your business community? Does it reflect the values of your community? Are there other things that we need to consider around sustainability of your community, sustainability of your environment? I mean, there's lots of potential investments that we could consider. Do they fit with what we're trying to achieve? Do they fit with our resources? In Southern Alberta, where I am, water is always a conversation. So if you have a very high water use, high intensity water using industry, that may not be appropriate for us. It might be better off in the northern half of the province where there are greater resources. Again, all part of the trade-off decision-making process we want councils to be thinking about, rather than simplifying it down to just jobs and taxes. I think that the key takeaway for elected officials, and it's part of the discussion and part of the sharing of examples that we use in the course, is the fact that elected officials, the policies and regulations they develop or don't develop, the incentives, the environment that they create will shape economic development. And councils can either shift it in a positive direction or in a negative direction. I'm not going to name names, but you all read the headlines. You know of communities in this province where councils have made decisions that have caused businesses to close or to leave or to, engage in very negative conversations about a community affecting their brand. And then there are other communities that are perceived as very much being business friendly or open to business. So again, elected officials, the messages they create, the social media they create, the brands that they either reinforce or take away from, all of that can have a very positive or negative effect on economic development. And so we talk through that in the course to help elected officials see the impacts that they can have. And again, align the work that we do as practitioners with the environment that they shape. As one of my colleagues says, elected officials' job is to bend the river so the private sector can fish in it. Well, what does that bend look like, and what kind of fish are you going after, I guess, is the key. I've loved this image for a very long time. This is often what happens in a community, right? You have tourism marketing that might be a separate function or a separate person in your organization. You might have some people in organizations, not-for-profits, supporting community development. I'm not sure I love the fact that the economic development horse is facing backwards. I'm not sure that what it says about my career, but nevertheless, here we are. There's chambers of commerce. And then you've also got, the municipality itself. And so we often have all of these disparate groups going in different directions and perhaps not aligned around the same goals. I know that's never happened in any of your communities, but it can happen out there, I guess is what I'm saying. It's possible. And so from a council perspective, elected officials ultimately can help make this happen. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that as an elected official, you're the person holding the reins. I'm not suggesting that councils need to be in control. I think councils might perhaps be more of the guy riding in the back, sticking out with his thumb up, somewhere in between perhaps. But elected officials, municipal policies, the environment that you create can very much help to bring these partners together, shared vision, shared goals, common metrics. There's an opportunity for elected officials to really drive their communities forward by aligning these horses, by putting them in the right place. And again, even if you're not holding the reins, can you provide the incentive that they're running towards? Did you make sure they were fed and watered? Are you servicing the carriage to make sure that it runs efficiently and isn't creating drag? There's lots of ways to think about this image in terms of what does a municipality's role look like? And inside of that, where do we expect our elected officials to take their part? We do sort of break down economic development into 3 core strategies. There's lots more, but when we're talking to elected officials, we want them to understand the difference between investment attraction, bringing that new business to town, versus business retention, and then of course, workforce development that supports that, and policy and infrastructure that government creates, that municipalities maintain and put forward, are really at the center of these 3 core strategies. We already talked before how a lot of new investment and new jobs come from your existing business, but you do need all 3 of these elements interacting. I mean, the analogy of a 3-legged stool, I'm sure everyone's heard that before. If you take away one leg, the whole stool collapses. And so this is the same kind of principle. But, again, in fairness to our elected officials, they may never have really thought about the distinction and the difference between business retention, supporting a business that's here already, versus trying to lure someone new to your community. And again, they're different kinds of work. There's some overlap, but there are different kinds of policy strategies. There's different kinds of things that we do there. And, just as one example, many of our communities have investment attraction tax policies. We have municipal tax cancellation incentives. Bring your new investment, we'll give you a tax reduction or a partial tax holiday for your new project. But interestingly, many of those same policies in Alberta have no provision if an existing business already in your community expands and spends the same kind of money. So, again, can you align those things to make sure you're not penalizing your existing business community if they're making similar sized investments? There are obviously way more than what's on the screen, but here's just a partial example of the many, many different strategies in economic development. And so, the point of sharing this slide with elected officials and the conversation that we have in the course is, there's literally a strategy for anything and everything you want to do. But again, if you only have one economic development officer, or if economic development is off the side of the desk of one person who's also your rec coordinator, the snowplow operator, and the garbage collector, you have to be realistic about what's the likelihood of these strategies being executed. How is this going to work in terms of actually moving the needle. So part of it is, again, starting with goals and objectives. What's the vision that council has, helping them understand their role, and then getting into, answering questions around some of the nitty gritty about what makes sense for your community to actually have an impact. And again, there's lots of different strategies out there, but it starts more with that vision and the big picture piece, but then we can drill down and get into the actual tactics that we think are going to have an impact. And again, elected officials may not be aware of some of these things, so we want to educate them a little bit on some of the options that are available to them. We also talked a little bit about partnerships and the power of partnerships. So, how do different government agencies play a role? Are you working with your regional economic development alliances? Is there an opportunity for, a naturally existing industry cluster that you already have? Is there a trade cluster or corridor because of the geography? Are there, post-secondary institutions in your community? Even healthcare facilities, right? We've seen in our region partnerships with post-secondary institutions, healthcare providers, and looking at that, workforce retention piece, non-traditional partnerships. At the end of the day, these might be really small if you're a rural community, but there are partners out there. I mean, think about my previous life as the mayor of the village of Sterling. We partnered with the school division. We partnered with FCSS. We partnered with the neighboring county. We partnered with a neighboring town. We partnered with a private sector provider. Again, thinking about all of the different resources and groups and people you interact with as a community, and how might you bring them in? What does that look like? And it doesn't necessarily mean there's an MOU or a steering committee or a committee of council. But again, all of these resources that are out there, as an elected official, how do you enroll people? How do you engage people? How do you keep these partnerships alive? And how do we leverage these from an economic development perspective? So that can be a fun conversation as well. We do talk a little bit about this age-old problem of governance versus operations, and where does economic development execution sit? There's no question elected officials play a role. I'll pick on the town of Taber for a moment as an example. They do a business visitation program where the mayor and the economic development officer actually go and visit businesses together. They have, coffee with the mayor, coffee with your EDO, and they've worked out a real good balance of the mayor's job is to cheerlead and to ask questions, and take notes, and the EDO is the one that's actually going to follow up and do some work. That might be scary to some of you, that you're actually going to have an elected official and administration person working together to interact with the business community. But they've worked out some very clear guidelines as to how that works and how to make it effective. But again, leveraging the tools and the infrastructure of your municipality and respecting the committees and the different structures that you have, making sure that your political leaders are on the governance side of the line, and your staff are on the administrative, are executing on the operations side. But it is possible for these things to work together. But I think it's an important conversation, because in economic development, it often gets a little fuzzy. And so it's important that elected officials understand where their role fits and have those candid conversations with their team. So we spend a bit of time on that. We also talk about the fact, it can be, there's all kinds of different funding models. We do go through different levels of, funding, the different programs that are available from government, but it's also thinking more broadly than that, the different kinds of partnerships or in-kind services or alliances that are out there that can help move your economic development agenda along. So again, there's some exercises and some case studies we can do to illustrate this point. We do talk about performance measurement in the course. Like I said, there's a whole full day course on performance measurement. There's literally hundreds and hundreds of potential metrics that you could track. One of my frustrations in industry, I came from an organization, large global company, that measured everything always every 2 seconds. And I would get literally dashboards at the end of every day with probably 100 KPIs for my team and my performance and my business. And after a while, you just sort of stop looking because it's too much data and it's not meaningful. So what are those key indicators that municipal governments can produce for the community? Because you should be accountable to your community. What are those key metrics that we can roll up to our elected officials that actually drive decision-making? What are the measures that are actually meaningful, aggregated indicators of performance? Do they represent what's going to happen, or are we only tracking what has happened, a lagging versus a leading indicator? And are we communicating it in a way that's actually understandable? Is it a dashboard? Is it an infographic? Because if you give me another 3,000 line long spreadsheet, it's probably just going to get deleted. So again, we can talk about, from a performance measurement perspective, what's going to be effective and how do we get elected officials the information that they need. And like I said, we do also talk about community resilience. And so the economy, typically what as an economic developer I focus on is jobs and taxes and creating the right workforce and building up the economy. But some of these other things have to happen in balance if we're going to withstand an economic shock like tariffs, or if we're going to withstand an emergency management kind of shock like a major fire. So your economic developers should be involved in conversations around infrastructure. There should be a link to recovery and how emergencies are managed, and what does that look like after the fire. Social services, programs to support your community, natural resources and cultural resources. Increasingly, culture, entertainment, quality of life is very much a part of how you sustain your community. And ultimately, I think we're all talking about housing these days. Well, again, economic developers have a perspective. Economic developers can often be involved in those conversations. And so, it is broader than just sort of traditional economic development. We want to make sure elected officials are thinking about, resilience. How do we build stronger communities that withstand these shocks and that can withstand some of the things that are yet to come? Because as we all know, it's been very boring and predictable over the last 12 months. There's really been nothing to think about from an economy or politics standpoint. It's all just been very boring. So, but these are the kinds of things we want to make sure we're talking about as we build our long-term strategies for our communities. And so with exactly 1 minute to spare, so ends my rant and very high level, quick overview about the economic development for elected officials course. At the conclusion of today, you will receive an email link that includes information about pricing and booking, as well as the slides that I've shared with you. But we've got about half an hour left, so happy to answer any questions that you have. We'll open it up to discussion, and if there's anything you don't agree with, you want to challenge me on something, fire away. We're happy to engage in that conversation too. So with that, I'll throw it back to you, Nancy, and we'll open up the floor.
Sure. Instead of putting your questions in the chat, just go ahead and raise your hand. And we can get to the questions that way. Kayla or Kaylin, sorry, I see that you have a question in the chat. Would you mind just raising your hand and we can just chat with Trevor directly?
Sure. Can you hear me okay there?
Yeah, yes. Sure can.
Perfect. So I'm from a northern rural municipality, and we struggle with economic development as a whole. When we go to our strat plan and we're trying to define it, and we all have different beliefs on it. And it's just kind of been the historical thing that it's something we don't need a dedicated officer. We can just do it off the edge of our desk. It's fine. It's just a buzzword. It's not a big thing. It's one little line in the MGA that we're required to look at or whatever. So what would be your advice to get it to be a more active thing? Like, I guess I'm feeling the pressure, like you say, with tariffs, because I don't think it's been boring. And we are a forestry municipality, and we're hit really hard, and we're facing some really ugly things. And so we're just trying to get everybody on board to see that. So what would be your advice for that?
Yeah, that's a great question, Kaylin. Thanks for that. I think there's a couple of things to think about in your specific example that probably apply to others as well. Typically we have to demonstrate that economic development provides value. So if there's a neighboring community or jurisdiction who's had economic development success, you might be able to point to say, hey, wouldn't you like more of this yourself? So again, if they landed a major project, or if they've had a revitalization project, or if there's some key successes you can point to in your region to say, we would like to see this for our community, and here's the resources that were allocated. So I think part of it is showing value. We have to demonstrate value, but are there success stories that are relevant to you that you can point to is part of it. Second, there are a number of communities that I've been dealing with lately who've historically had a lot of success because economic development just happened. Either they were in the right industry for the moment, or they were in the right geographic location, but all of a sudden things have changed, either because of tariffs or because of a shifting economy. And now all of a sudden they're realizing that they should have been making those investments years ago. They should have been putting those processes and infrastructure to support economic development in place. And so for you, again, if forestry is the key driver, is there an opportunity to educate people on the risks to the forestry industry going forward? And some of the industry itself has a number of forecasts showing what the potential impacts are on continued tariffs and a decrease in, would that be enough to inspire more discussion about, yeah, we really should do things differently, or yeah, we should probably rearrange. So that might be an approach. And then lastly, I would say, I think it comes back to that vision conversation of, and again, councils may say, elected officials may say, we're totally good with the status quo. What we have today is exactly what we want. Awesome. That is a decision you get to make. The challenge back might be, okay, what do we think our community looks like in 5 to 10 years? What is your vision for what we're trying to create? And is what we're doing today going to get us there in the future? And that can often prompt the conversation of, oh, well, we'd really like X, Y, or Z. Okay, well, based on that, we need A, B, and C to make that happen. So sometimes it can be a historical look back, a look to other competitors and communities around you. Friendly competition is always a good thing. Or looking forward to, what do we really want? Does that help?
Yeah, that's perfect. I think that answers my question. So I think some of my other counselors need to take the course.
Well, perfect. Jadis can hook you up. Just let us know.
Thanks very much. Anybody else have a question?
Can I just jump in? It's Mark
Sure
Laver
can.
here. Sorry, I can't find the raise hand on the screen here.
It's all good.
First question is this course offered at like RMA or one of those other elected official type of meetings?
Yeah, great question. We have partnered with RMA as well as Alberta municipalities, both institutions. We've done historically sort of short versions, so like an hour or two seminar that's a very condensed version of the course around the conferences. We've also typically had presence at the trade shows. So elected officials can come up to us in the trade show. There's usually an EDA booth that people can interact with.
Yeah.
But in terms of like a full pre-conference workshop the day before, I think it's been talked about. I don't know that we've been successful in getting that booked, but that certainly would be an option when you've got a captive audience to run a course either before or after. That's the full version.
So this would be a full day course versus a 1 hour seminar.
Yeah, this course typically runs about 9:30 to 3:30, so it's a good 6 or 7 hours depending on the discussion in the group.
Okay.
You can hit the highlights in a 1 hour seminar. I mean, I breezed through that pretty quickly, but it's, to me, the power of the longer version is the actual conversation and interaction and really digging into the weeds a little bit.
That was the pushback that I got recently when I brought up this topic that, we can get that course at RMA. Well, no, you can't actually. So okay.
Yeah, no, you can't. You get the super condensed highlight version, which adds value, but it's not as powerful in Trevor's humble opinion.
All right, great, thanks. Second question: can you provide a source for your 5545 or 5544-1?
Yeah, what I'll do is I'll get that to Janice, and she can send that out with the rest of today's information.
All right, great. Thanks very much.
Yeah, no problem.
Anybody else have anything to add? Any other questions?
Yeah, along the same lines, I don't see the raise hand icon here either. This course, is it an online course that we could take as an entire council, or is it an in-person course, or will that be in the information we get at the end of the webinar?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I mean, the course is available in both formats. So there is an in-person. We'll send an instructor to you in your community. You can get neighboring communities together. We'll do it as a live course. There is an online version that individual folks can also log into. You do have to register individually just because we want to be able to issue certificates, and it's sort of self-driven. So you can register every member of council, but they would have to do it on their own just because there's interactive things that they can do, and they can sort of do it at their own pace. I am biased. I have a bias. I'll freely admit that I believe the in-person as a council is more powerful because you do get to have the collective conversation, but that's not always possible or affordable necessarily for every community. And so the online version is there as an alternative.
Oh, perfect. No, I appreciate it.
Nancy, did you want to jump in there with any?
Well, and Janice, correct me if I'm wrong, but we also have an in-person virtual. So where you can, arrange for your council to meet in a boardroom, for example, and then the instructor can appear over Zoom. So that's an option as well.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. Larry, you have a question?
Yeah, just economic development with all the thoughts on separatism that seem to be eroding the province here in Western Canada. Any comments from Trevor and you folks? It worries me.
Yeah, I mean, certainly not a part of today's discussion of the course. I mean, I'm happy to share my personal thoughts with you offline. I did pen an op-ed on Sunday on this subject and sort of my personal concerns. It's on LinkedIn. and it got 20,000 views in the first 2 days. So that tells me it's definitely on top of people's mind. It generated a fair bit of hate mail from both sides. So, it's one of those topics. But, at the end of the day, regardless of what your personal views are on separatism or an independent Alberta, or even what's going on between Canada, the US, China, those kinds of things, those are exactly the kinds of issues councils need to be debating, right? As communities, we need to be thinking about the consequences of this,
Yep.
whether I agree with it or not. And if it happens, then we need to be prepared for that as a part of resilience. Or if it doesn't happen, what does that look like for our industries? So as uncomfortable as that conversation can be sometimes, I do believe that should be part of the strat planning and the conversation, because right now we seem to be just sort of drifting into a potential referendum from both sides without really having a robust debate and a conversation around facts and perceptions. That's my quick 2 minutes.
No, that'd be my concern. Yeah, you've captured it very well. Thank you.
Thanks.
Any other questions?
Well, I'm not hard to find, so feel free to engage either through socials or reach out to EDA. I'm happy to continue this conversation one-on-one, particularly around the course and any specific questions you have or thoughts. But certainly the EDA team, both Janice and Nancy are on today. They're a wealth of knowledge and resources in terms of the programs that we offer and the creative ways we can get that to you and how we make that work for your community. So don't hesitate to reach out to the team. Whatever your needs are, let's figure out how we can best support you. Because at the end of the day, our job is to make our communities stronger and better places to live. And that's ultimately why our organization exists, in supporting our members. So thanks for your time today. And like I said, reach out anytime if I can be useful.
Thanks very much, Trevor. And thanks everybody for joining. Keep an eye on your inbox and you'll be receiving more information from us. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.